Let's discuss Bastille Day. This is another lecture. I'm Alexei, and let's begin with a structural overview.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm excited to learn and maybe to ask a few questions that sound simple but are not.
To frame our discussion in simple terms, Bastille Day is France's national day, held each year on 14 July. It commemorates two linked moments of the French Revolution. First, the storming of the Bastille fortress in 1789. Second, the Fête de la Fédération in 1790, a massive unity festival 1 year later. If you will, it functions rather like the 4th of July in the United States, a day when the state and the public synchronize memory, flags, fireworks, and conviviality.
So basically, it's the day France says who it is. We broke with arbitrary power in 1789, then we tried to knit the nation together in 1790. That seems like a useful balance.
In more technical terms, it is a state holiday, jour férié, that ritualizes revolutionary memory and national unity. Legally and commonly in France, one speaks of the Fête nationale, or le 14 juillet. The English phrase Bastille Day is less common domestically. It encodes two complementary narratives into the civic calendar: insurrection against arbitrary monarchy in 1789, and a constitutional reconciliatory oath-taking in 1790. The parade, the flags, the music, and the public closures of offices all function as semiotics of sovereignty and solidarity.
I think that helps. We get a shared story and also the symbols that make it visible to everyone in the streets.
Moving forward, why does it matter now? First, identity. Bastille Day is a mirror in which contemporary France sees itself as republican, civic, and connected to allies. Since 1918, the Grand Military Parade on the Champs-Élysées has doubled as a diplomatic stage, with allied contingents and invited dignitaries signaling partnerships and reconciliations. Think, for example, German troops marching in 1994, or British forces leading in 2004. Second, memory management. It reminds us that the Bastille held only 7 inmates in 1789. The fortress was politically huge and practically small. Its symbolism as the embodiment of arbitrary detention, not its head count, electrified France. And crucially, the holiday fuses the tumult of 1789 with the unity of 1790. So the national narrative is not only rupture but also repair.
Isn't it interesting how the most famous prison day was about the idea of the prison more than the prisoners? That contrast makes the story stick.
On to our next point, basic facts. The Paris Parade is the oldest large regular military parade in Europe, televised nationwide. Since 1918, it runs from the Arc de Triomphe down the Champs-Élysées to the Place de la Concorde, where the president and ambassadors review the troops. It has been remarkably continuous, interrupted only by the German occupation in 1940-1944, and, in a different register, the pandemic disruption in 2020. Locally, smaller parades occur across garrison towns, and internationally, communities from Liège to Pondicherry to New York stage their own festivities with concerts, food, and fireworks. The holiday closes many services and invites both solemn commemoration and popular festivity. Now, to place events in time. Chronologically, we observe May 1789, when the Estates General convene. 20th June, the tennis court oath. 11 July, the dismissal of Jacques Necker heightens unrest. Morning 14 July. Arms are seized from the Hôtel des Invalides. Later that day, the Bastille is stormed, aided by mutinous French guards. Casualties mount. Governor Delaunay is killed amid chaotic fighting. Jump ahead to 1790. On 14 July, the Fête de la Fédération stages mass oaths and a unity feast on the Champ de Mars. In 1880, after parliamentary debate, 14 July becomes the national holiday. Subsequent milestones include de Gaulle presiding in exile celebrations during 1940-1944, a spectacular bicentennial in 1989, and periodic security inflection points such as the 2002 attempt on President Jacques Chirac and the 2016 Nice attack. A brief personal note. I once stood along the avenue in Paris. The choreography felt almost mathematical, units advancing with metronomic precision while aircraft traced the sky. You hear La Marseillaise as more than a melody. It functions as a connective tissue between strangers on the curb. Fireworks later provide the coda. One senses both the archive and the agora at work.
That image of archive and agora is nice. So yeah, moving on. Can we set up the big questions for today?
This logically leads us to three questions. Number one, what historical sequence produced the storming of the Bastille? Number two, what might have changed had the Third Republic chosen a different holiday date? And number three, how do global celebrations reinterpret the day today? Question one. Before we get to the complexities, recall the foundations. France in 1789 faces fiscal crisis and food shortages. The Estates General convenes in May, and the Third Estate asserts itself as the National Assembly. On 20th June, the tennis court oath declares a constitutional intent. The dismissal of Necker on 11 July is perceived as a hostile signal. Crowds mobilize. Fears of royal troops and foreign mercenaries amplify. On the morning of 14 July, Parisians seize muskets and cannons from the Hôtel des Invalides and then turn to the Bastille for powder. The Régiment des Gardes Françaises, or significant elements thereof, side with the crowds, bringing training and firepower. Governor Delaunay capitulates, but confusion reignites violence. Around 200 attackers and one defender die before capitulation, and Delaunay is killed in the aftermath. Symbolically, the fortress embodied arbitrary justice. Practically, it supplied munitions and a rallying point. The fall becomes a signal flare to the provinces and the world.
I'm curious about the symbol. If there were only 7 inmates, can we say the crowd was storming an idea more than a prison? Like the end of lettres de cachet as a habit of rule?
Precisely. In simpler terms, the Bastille was a billboard advertising arbitrary power. The crowd tore down the billboard. The paucity of prisoners is almost the point. The fortress stood for a system where one could vanish by royal signature. Its fall catalyzed momentum. Within weeks and months, we see the abolition of feudalism on 4 August and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen on 26 August. The symbol unlocked a political cascade. Question 2. What if 14 July had not been chosen in 1880? Debates considered dates like 4 August, 5 May, 27 July, or even 21 January. If, hypothetically, 4 August, the abolition of feudalism, had become the national day, the annual narrative might emphasize social rights and the end of seigneurial privilege rather than urban insurrection. Ceremonies could have centered legal reform and equality before the law as the master metaphor. Conversely, 5th May would foreground constitutional origins. 27 July, the Thermidorian break. 21st January, the moral tragedy of regicide. Each date encodes a different civic mood. By selecting 14 July and explicitly tying 1789 to the 1790 Fête de la Fédération, lawmakers balanced rupture with reconciliation, which is why the choice proved durable.
Building on that, how heated were those debates? And why did the 1880 legislators insist on linking both 1789 and 1790, rather than just the storming itself?
It is worth noting that the politics were delicate. A law introduced by Deputy Benjamin Raspail gathered support, and to some extent the compromise was conceptual. It framed 14 July not only as the storming, but also as the Fête de la Fédération. This dual anchoring softened objections to celebrating a violent uprising, while affirming Republican unity and constitutional order. Press coverage at the time already blended memory of 1789 with the conviviality and mass oath of 1790. The legal designation followed suit. In conclusion on this point, the hybrid date gave the Republic a holiday that could be both solemn and inclusive. Question 3. How is Bastille Day celebrated around the world today? The pattern is broadly twofold. Where there is a strong French presence or historical tie, we see official or large community events. Elsewhere, we see playful translations of French symbols into local street festivals. Consider Liège in Belgium, whose First World War resistance won it the Légion d'honneur. Its festivities can outdraw Belgium's own National Day, complete with fireworks and the consul's dance. In India, Pondicherry marks the date with ceremonies and cultural programs that blend French and Indian heritage. In Tahiti, an old authorization to celebrate evolved into Heva i Tahiti, now a major festival of canoe races, tattooing, music, and dance, foregrounding Polynesian identity alongside the French connection.
Can we maybe now look at the United States? I've heard there are many city versions that are delightfully improvised.
Indeed, in the United States, more than 20 cities mount annual Bastille Day events. New York hosts a large street fair on 60th Street and an enduring Bastille Day ball dating back to 1924. Brooklyn and Tribeca also join in. Milwaukee stages a mock storming with a 43-foot Eiffel Tower replica. St. Louis leans into theater with mock beheadings of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette and a gathering of the mob. Philadelphia formerly featured a comic reenactment at Eastern State Penitentiary, where a faux Marie Antoinette tossed tasty cakes. That tradition concluded in 2018. Portland's public festivals have run since 2001. Seattle convenes at Seattle Center. Sacramento holds Paris-style waiter races. Newport, Rhode Island links to Rochambeau's 1780 landing. Austin celebrates at the historic French legation. Washington, D.C. pairs embassy events with a French festival. New Orleans layers festivities over deep Francophone heritage. One sees a spectrum from diplomatic pageantry to neighborhood conviviality.
What comes to mind next is Canada, London, maybe Budapest. How do those illustrate local adaptation rather than just import?
We observe a consistent hybridization. In Canada, Vancouver and Toronto stage festivals with Francophone music, food, and family activities, reflecting local communities rather than simply French expatriates. London disperses festivities across markets and parks. Music, games, and even French theater adapt to the city's neighborhood textures. Budapest hosts a two-day French food and wine market along the Danube, fusing Hungarian hospitality with French gastronomy. In New Zealand, street festivals feature mimes, dancers, and French food, while Wellington's Residence of France adds a diplomatic layer. In South Africa's Franschhoek, the French Corner, Bastille Day becomes a weekend of wine and cuisine tied to Huguenot heritage. And in Prague, a July market on Kampa Island lights lanterns and serves French fare. It began in 2008 around an EU handover and has since become a summer fixture. In each case, the day becomes a canvas for local identity to converse with French motifs.
So, I guess the pattern is that diaspora and historical ties shape the mood, while food, music, and a few iconic images travel easily. Maybe it's just me, but that sounds like cultural diplomacy disguised as a picnic.
Arguably, yes. However, we should not omit the security dimension that arrives with visibility. Incidents like the 2002 attempt on President Chirac or the 2016 attack in Nice have altered protective postures and memorial practices. Festivity and vigilance now coexist. The calendar carries joy and remembrance together.
So, I guess that kind of sums it up. But could we quickly restate the core definition before we say goodbye?
To summarize, Bastille Day, le 14 juillet, is France's national day, commemorating both the 1789 storming of the Bastille and the 1790 Fête de la Fédération. We explored three big questions: the historical chain that produced 14 July 1789, the counterfactual of choosing a different commemorative date and how that would shift national tone, and the contemporary global celebrations that hybridize French symbols with local cultures. For further study, one might examine how revolutionary ideals of rights and citizenship traveled globally, and how national days everywhere function as instruments of public memory. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening, and be well.
Thank you, Professor. That was helpful to think through, actually.